In today's video, I'm gonna show you my full photo editing workflow for landscape photography in Luminar NEO. We're gonna start by the basic raw development and then move into the additional tools in Luminar NEO to get the most out of our landscape photos. Okay, so starting from the beginning, we are in Luminar NEO in the catalog module and we have our sample file ready. As always, if you want to follow me along, all you need to do is to jump into the description of this video, follow the link there and download the sample file now. Once you have it ready, import it into the application and we can start. Now let's make it nice and large and let me quickly tell you what we're looking at. This is a beautiful sunrise capture of the Old Man of Storr rock formation on the beautiful Scottish island that is called Isle of Skye. So we will have a lot to play with, so that is all good. And now we can move into the editing workflow. Now, when it comes to editing landscapes, I have 6 steps. And in the first step, before I go into the edit module, I start here in the catalog module by checking the camera details of that specific image. And let me tell you why. So we are here, we're gonna select the image and we're gonna focus on the top right corner of our screen. If you can't see this toolbar, there is a little icon here where you can hide it and unhide it. So looking at the camera details, you can find out more about the image, you can see which camera I used, lens, the resolution and size, and you can also see that it's a RAW file. However, for the editing part, we are more interested in the camera details here, how the image was captured. For example, starting with the ISO, you can see that it's on 100, which is really low. That's the ideal number you want to have for the landscape photo. And that also means that we will not be working with lots of noise. So that's great to know. After that, 24mm, f7.1 and 1/13 of a second. So all these little details we're gonna store in our head, knowing for the editing. And once we're ready, we can now again make sure that we have the image selected and we're gonna move it into the edit module. This is where we're gonna move into the step number 2, where we're gonna do the basic development using the raw tools. Luminar NEO has only 2 raw tools, and you can easily identify them with this little blue raw at the end. So you can see we have the noiseless raw extension, if you have it, and also we have the develop raw. So at this point, on the step number 2, we're only going to use 2 tools, develop raw and noiseless raw. And the reason is that at this point, this is still raw file. It has all the data, all the information, so we want to edit them raw. If we would start to use any other tool, for example, the enhance AI and increase the accent AI, the image immediately stops being raw file. And as you can see, we lost our develop raw and noiseless raw, and we are working with little bit less data. So this is why we want to start from the beginning with the step number 2, only using the raw tools. So let's reset the image, and we can do that by going to the bottom of the screen and selecting revert to original. And let's go back, and coming back to the beginning, to the first step, I told you that there is not much noise on the image. However, we still want to double check. And to do that, usually good practice is to zoom in 100% and kind of look around. Now, there is usually lots of noise in the sky or the darker areas of the image. Now, looking at it from this point of view, I don't see too many. So we're not going to use the noiseless raw extension. However, I want you to know that if you would use it, you would use it right now. So you would select the noiseless raw, select which of the adjustments you want and let it go. Once you finish with the noiseless raw, then we're gonna move into the develop raw. Let's just zoom out on our image so we can see it all and focus on that tool there. So let's make it nice and visible. Let's actually close the light. And the first thing we're gonna do before anything else, we're gonna move into the optics tab. Here, I want you to make sure that the auto distortion corrections, auto fix chromatic aberrations, and auto differentiate is all on. So once we do that, we make sure that all these corrections are applied, and when we do any editing, we already doing them after everything is being fixed. So this is all done. If you have any struggle with your lens, you can also adjust the lens distortion, devignette, and devignette midpoint with the sliders here. But for us, and for this image, this is it for the optics. So let's close it, and let's move into camera profile. Let's go on the top. To start with, by default, there will be Luminar NEO default profile selected. However, depends on your camera, there may be other options. Now, I also have a tutorial on how to get more external profiles into the application, and if you want, I will link it in the top right corner of the screen now. So there are some other options, and you can check them simply by hovering over them. As you can see, when I go through them, the image changes live as I scroll through the options, and if I like one, I can simply select it here. Let's say I can go for the Adobe standard or maybe camera standard. However, to make it same for everyone, let's go for the Luminar default. So camera profile is the next thing we taken care of, so we can close it and move on. The next thing we're gonna do is to take care of sharpening and noise reduction. Now, people often ask me, when should they do this? When should they sharpen their images and remove the noise? And my suggestion is in the workflow. As we are now working with as much data as possible from our raw file, using the Develop Pro tool, this is the time when you should do the initial sharpening and noise reduction. Now, throughout the edit, there are maybe another points where you want to do more sharpening. For example, when you want to add more sharpness and more attention towards a specific part of the image. Or you're going to sharpen the image again before you export it for print. However, the initial sharpening and the initial noise reduction on the raw file should be done at the beginning when you're doing the basic development. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, it's also important to remember that noise reduction and sharpening are closely related together. And the reason is that as I sharpen the image, I sharpen the details, but I also enhance and sharpen the noise in the image. And on the other side, when I apply the noise reduction and specifically the luminosity slider, I remove the noise. However, at the same time, I remove a little bit of the details. So we need to find a right balance between the two sliders. And to do that, let's just reset them. Now, the first thing we need to do is to zoom into 100%. Now, to do that, we can use the mouse, or we can also use the shortcut at the bottom of the screen where you click on the zoom and select 100% here. After that, use your mouse and drag the image around until you're in the area where you can see some texture and details. Now, looking at it, there is a little bit of light noise on the sky and the background. So what I suggest you to do when you have a light to medium noise is to add 20 or 15 on your luminosity slider. So let's do that. Let's add 20. And just like that, most of the noise is gone. Now we have the noise reduction adjusted. However, how to adjust the sharpening? Where for this, I have a great formula. Imagine the number 100 minus the amount of luminosity. So 100 minus 20 equals to 80. And that's how much we're going to be adding on our sharpen slider. So let's do that. Let's take the sharpen slider and bring it to 80. Now, let's say that you would add 10 on luminosity, you would have only a little bit of noise, so then you would take 100 minus 10, which would equal to 90, so you would add 90 into the sharpen slider. Now we are almost done, however, the last thing we need to adjust is masking. And the reason is that at this moment, we are sharpening everything, the sky, the textures, everything. And actually, we only want to be sharpening the areas with the textures, details, and edges. So to do that, to adjust it, we're going to use the masking slider. And generally, for most cameras, the good value is between 60 or 70. So let's add 65, and that's that. So for landscape photography, the formula for noise reduction and sharpening is the number 100. 100 minus the amount of luminosity and add that much into the sharpening. But don't forget to also adjust the masking, as it's really important, because by masking areas where there are no details, again, you're enhancing the noise. So now we have that done, we can close the sharpness and noise reduction and move into the light and blacks and whites. Now first, let's make sure that we zoom out, and then we also want to make sure that you can see the histogram like on my screen. Now to do that, just right-click on the image and select Show Histogram. Once you have it, click on it and click until you see this gray version, just like this. So that will show us just the highlights, shadows and midtones. Once we have that selected, we can come back to our Develop Pro tool and we're gonna skip over the exposure and contrast and focus on the highlights, shadows, blacks and whites. Now to adjust them, we want to make sure that we have the clipping mask on. To do that, we can use the little white dots in a corner of the histogram, or you can also hit J on your keyboard. Now, how does the clipping mask help? So let me show you. When we make the highlights bright, and let's say we increase the exposure, at some point you're starting to see the red overlay over your image. Now the red overlay indicates the area that is completely white and completely overexposed. You can also see it on the histogram with this wave going all the way to right. So you don't want to see that. Equally, when we go the other way around, when we close the shadows and then make it much darker, you will start to see this blue overlay. And that indicates the areas that are completely black. So again, we lost the details there. Now let's go ahead and reset our sliders so we can go back to make sure that we have the clipping mask disappear, and after that we can continue. Now coming back to our histogram, you can see the little wave in shadows and a little bit of a wave in highlights. However, you can also see that we have lots of empty space here, which is not really right. We want to have a data there. Now we can adjust this, and we should adjust it right now. To do that, we're gonna go into the curves. And don't worry, it's not gonna be complicated at all. We're gonna just make sure that we are on the black and white curve at the beginning, and then we're gonna focus on the line at the bottom of the curve. Again, look at the histogram here. You can see how there is no data here. So to adjust this, we're gonna take the little point on the right and just drag it towards the data. So basically, we're skipping the areas without the data there. So let's go ahead and let's say if we shift it a little bit, somewhere around here, I think we should be good. Maybe a little bit more towards right, but that's a good start. So what we did, we basically removed the empty space from our histogram. Now we can close the curves and return to our highlights, shadows, blacks, and whites. So first come first, we're gonna adjust our highlights, the brighter parts of our image. To do that, we're gonna take the highlight slider and actually bring it down. We're gonna make them a little bit darker. And by doing that, you can see that we're getting some of the details in the sky back. So that's great, let's do that. Let's just shift it somewhere around here. I think maybe -85 looks good for the moment. After that, we're gonna take the shadows and open them up. We're gonna take the darker areas of the image and make them brighter. So let's take the shadow slider and bring it up just to somewhere where you like. For me, I think 10 should be good enough. After that, we're gonna move our attention towards the blacks and whites. With the blacks, we want to make them a little bit darker, so let's take the slider and bring it down. Again, keeping an eye on our histogram and also the image, so bring it down a little bit to somewhere around -20. And then with the whites, we're going to increase them. Now, we don't want to go crazy to somewhere around here, but I think maybe around 38, 40 should be good. Once we're done with the blacks and whites, we can return to the highlights and shadows to see if we need to adjust them again. I think for me, just the shadows, maybe open them up a little bit further, and that's about it. Now looking at the histogram, everything looks good. We have this little nice U shape on our histogram. So we can now close the blacks and whites and return into the light where we can adjust our exposure and contrast. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of contrast to the image. Again, you will see that by adding more contrast, the U shape is getting a little bit wider. And when you bring it down, it's getting a little bit less wider, a little bit more narrow. So really it is up to us what we prefer. I think even minus contrast looks actually quite good, but let's go ahead and add somewhere around 10 for now. Now for the exposure, for the time being, I'm quite happy with it. However, if you want, you can add a little bit to somewhere around here. And looking at the histogram, you're just trying to match the two peaks together. So I think maybe a little bit, like somewhere around 0.15 should be good enough. So we have the light, blacks and white adjusted. We don't need to work with the curves. So the next step is to move into the color tab. This is where we're going to be adjusting our temperature and also saturation and vibrance. Now looking at the image, I'm quite happy with the colors. However, if we want, we can adjust it from here. With the raw files, you usually have few presets here. You have the option as shot, and that's the original white balance coming from the camera. After that, we have the preset as daylight, cloud, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, and flash. Now let's have a look at it. Let's try the daylight and see what it does. And actually, that looks quite decent. Let's have a look at the cloudy. Now that is a little bit too warm for me. After that, we have the shade, which is way too warm. And the other ones are for different kind of scenes, so we don't worry about them too much. So let's go for daylight as our beginning, because I quite like that. And actually adjust the temperature and tint additionally. So the temperature slider allows us to make the image cooler or warmer. So when we go towards the blue, towards the left, the image is cooler. When we go towards the right, towards the warmth, it makes it warmer. Similarly, with the tint, we have a chance to make the tint a little bit more green or a little bit more purple magenta. Again, let's reset it with our daylight setup, and let's just add a little bit of temperature. Now, not too much, somewhere around here is enough. Maybe that's even too much. Let's reset it again and just add somewhere around here. And let's add a little bit of magenta with our tint slider. I quite like to do that, especially when there is a pink sky on the image. So let's have a look. I think that somewhere around maybe 12 is enough. After that, we just have the saturation and vibrance slider left. And traditionally on the landscape photos, I actually like to take the saturation slider down, just somewhere around -10, and then take the vibrance slider and increase it. Now you can do the opposite, you can add 10, it's up to you. However, the reason why we do this is that I want to undersaturate the image a little bit, just to make sure that it's not screaming out, and then take the smarter vibrance slider and just push some of the lower saturated tones. So I think that works quite well. It is really up to you what you want to do. However, we have adjusted the temperature and tint, and also adjusted the saturation and vibrance to make it a little bit more natural. Now, where the light, blacks and whites, sharpness, noise reduction, and other similar tabs have a quite science behind where you can learn it and apply it, the color tab is the one where you really have to use your own judgment. Some people see images a little bit warmer, some people see them with a little bit more magenta. However, it's very personal and specific to each photographer. Now to start with, I suggest you to try one of the presets. And remember that on this setting, less is always more. To start with little adjustments until you're really comfortable with how much of the temperature, tint, saturation, and vibrance you're adding to your images. So for now, we are done here. We can close the color tool, we can close the Develop Raw tool and we are finished with the step number 2, where we did the basic development. Now at this step, I always like to come back to the catalog, and the reason why I do that is when you exit the edit module, the settings you have applied to the image get saved. As long as you're editing in edit module, everything is stored in a virtual copy. So if the application crashes or exited, you will lose it. So this is why I like to move into the catalog, the editing get saved, and then we can safely return into the edit module. Now, before we continue, I know that the developing part is quite complex. So if you're struggling with it, or if you need any help, we have a great tool that may be helpful. And the tool is our Luminar NEO Essential Preset Bundle. Now, the bundle does include 41 preset collections and over 410 presets. However, the main reason why I wanted to talk to you about it is one specific collection. And that collection is the raw development presets. So if you're not comfortable with the basic development or don't know where to start, then this preset collection is exactly what you need. You can then start, apply the preset, and continue with the other editing. Now to get it, you can follow the link in the description, or you can also head to our website cleverphotographer.com/Luminar presets. Okay, so we have done our basic development, so it's time to move on the step number 3, which involves the heavy edits. When I say heavy edits, what do I mean? I'm talking about the generative AI tools, using the super sharp AI extension, applying sky replacement, applying tools like atmosphere AI or sunrays tool, and also adding some new elements using the layers panel and overlays. With the overlays, of course, that you can add all sorts of new elements. Moon, clouds, fog, mist, anything that you can imagine. However, remember that once you're done adding these elements, you want to export the image to make sure that everything is merged together. And when you're exporting it, export it in a highest quality TIFF file, and then bring it back into Luminar NEO and continue with the edit when you have all of the elements and layers merged together. So one more time, step number 3, the heavy edits, you use your generative AI tools, super sharp AI extension, replace the sky, add the fog with the atmosphere AI, sunrays with the sunrays tool, or add any new elements using the overlays. Now for this image specifically, we will not do any of the heavy editing. So now we are free to move to the step number 4, which involves the cropping and erasing. So let's have a look at it. We can crop it a little bit, and to do that, we're gonna go back to our main editing toolbar and use the crop AI. Here, when we click on the ratio drop-down box, we can use any of the presets here. And specifically for a scene like this, I quite like to use the panoramic 16:9. Once we have it selected, it will crop it for us, and then we can use the mouse to position it around. Let's have a look at it. Let's position it in such a way that when we look at the rule of thirds lines, we position the main subject over the golden point on the lines here. Once we have it positioned there, we can click on Apply. After that, it's time to do a little bit of erasing. So let's go into Erase, and here what we want to do, we want to apply things like remove power lines or remove dust spots. Now there was a dust spot earlier, however, as I did the cropping, it disappeared. But just to make sure, let's click on the remove dust spots and let the application scan the image and remove any of the spots I haven't noticed. Once we apply the automatic tools, we can then return to the basics, and if we need, we can remove anything on the image. Now we have a full tutorial on how to use the erase tool. It's really simple. What you do, you just select specific part of the image with the brush and then click on erase. Once we're done, we can close the erase tool, and that pretty much finish the 4th step where we done the cropping and where we done the erasing. With the step 4 being done, now we can move on the step number 5, where we're gonna use the rest of the tools in Luminar NEO. So let's do that. I usually like to start from the top of the list and work my way through. So let's start with the Enhance AI. We're gonna click on it and open it, and we have two options here, Accent AI and Sky Enhancer. So let's try it. Let's use the Accent AI a little bit. Now, I don't like to overdo it. I think it's way too much. However, I think somewhere around 31 works actually quite nicely on this image. Maybe a little bit less, maybe 25. Let's have a look. Yeah, that does quite good job. Now with the Sky Enhancer, again, you want to be careful. Don't overdo it like this because it's just crazy. However, just a little bit, I think maybe somewhere around maybe 10, between 5 and 10 works quite well. When we finish with the Enhance AI, we can close it and move on through our list. We have already done the erase, and then comes the Structure AI. Now, Structure AI works with multiple different tools, but one of the main characters is the clarity. And when I edit image like this, I usually like to take the amount slider and bring it down. Because when you do all the development and all the enhancing, the image start to get a little bit of HDR feel. And I like to bring that back with taking the amount slider in Structure AI and bring it down to somewhere around -10 or -20. So Structure AI, the amount down just a little bit. Then we can close the tool. We're not gonna do anything in a color tool. We're not gonna do any black and white. However, I quite like to use the details. Let's click on it to open it, and here you're going to see an option between small, medium, and large details. Now you can use it however you want, but for me, I quite like to take the small details and bring them somewhere around 10 or 12. And with the medium details, let's say somewhere around 8. Generally, I don't use the large details because I think it's just too strong, but the small and medium details can add a little bit of extra feel to the areas with the details on it. Now, just like with the sharpening at the beginning, it's good to open the details masking and then take the details masking slider up to somewhere between 60 or 70. So for us, we're gonna add 70, close the details masking, close the details, and continue. We have already taken care of our denoise, so we don't worry about that. However, we're gonna use the landscape tool. Here we have multiple options. You could use the dehaze, golden hour, or foliage enhancer. Now, I am not a big fan of the foliage enhancer, as I think it makes the image a little bit unnatural. However, I like the golden hour slider. It does use a combination of different effects, a little bit of warmth, glow, and saturation, and I think it works quite well when it's used carefully. So let's go ahead and use the golden hour slider. Usually I like to bring it up quite a lot to see what it does, and then just bring it back down until I'm happy with the result. So let's have a look. I think somewhere around 30 looks quite well. Now we can close the landscape tool. We're not gonna do the vignette because that will be the last step of the edit, and we can move into the creative part of our main toolbar. Here, Relight AI, we're not gonna do. Sky AI, we have already done, or we would have already done in our third step. No Atmosphere AI or Sun Rays. So let's move through the tool and see what we're going to use. These tools will very much depend on your own style. However, from those I like to use, I like to apply a little bit of mystical tool. So let's open that. And here, very easily, we're just gonna take the amount slider and increase it a little bit. Somewhere around, let's say 15 or 20 usually works quite well. And it just adds a little bit of character to the image. So the mystical tool, carefully, somewhere around 10 or 20 usually works well. Let's have a look at the before and after. And even though the difference is very subtle, it is part of the whole process where we're creating certain look. So mystical tool is one of the tools I like to use. After that, for landscape photography, in Glow, you can use the Orton effect, which works quite well with landscape photography. Also, the matte tool, when it's applied gently just into the shadows, can make the image a little bit more cinematic. So let's go and add somewhere around 10. After that, if you want, Mood tool and LUTs is a great way to enhance the overall image. And especially if you do some heavy edits like a sky replacement or new elements, then the Mood tool and LUTs can really help to blend everything together. However, for me, I'm quite happy with what we done already, so we're not gonna apply any of the LUTs from here. So let's close the Mood tool. And finally, in the creative section, one more tool I like to use from time to time is the dramatic tool, which can really help for more moody shots or also on a long exposure shots. You can just increase the tool, usually again very gently, because this tool originally was built more for portrait photos, but it can be quite helpful when used in caution. So for me, I think somewhere around 10 can work quite well. And what you would do, you would just apply it to the specific part of your image. So let's say just really the foreground here. So to do that, we would just use masking, select the brush, increase it, and maybe adjust the strength to somewhere around 40. And then just carefully brush over the foreground right here. So something like this. And we add a little bit of dramatic effect towards the foreground of the image. Again, once finished, close the dramatic tool and we can continue. Now we are pretty much done with the creative section, so let's go ahead and jump quickly into the professional tools. Here is one tool I really like to use, and that's the super contrast. So let's click on it to open it, and once we open it, you will see that we have 3 options here. We have the highlights contrast, midtones contrast, and shadows contrast. So that's a great way of how you can edit the contrast in a specific parts of your image. So generally, I like to use the highlights and midtones. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of contrast in the highlights, and that usually adjusts your sky. So let's see, keep an eye somewhere around, I think 14 looks quite good. After that, we can also adjust the midtones. So let's see, I think maybe just somewhere around here. When I play around with it, you can see it has a quite nice effect on the mountains at the back. So let's see, somewhere around here. So 15 on midtones and 14, 15 on highlights. Again, let's have a look before and after. And as you can see on all these tools, they are all subtle effects. They don't completely change the image. However, as combined together, little by little, they help to create the overall look. So now we are done with the super contrast. So let's close it and we're gonna continue. And now, since we are finished with the super contrast tool, we are done applying the global adjustments. So after this, what I would do is to apply more adjustments locally. One example is the dodge and burn technique. This is where we can make some parts of the image a little brighter and the other parts darker. And with that, it can help to bring more attention towards specific parts of the image. So let's do that. Now, you can use the dodge and burn tool at the professional section. However, I prefer to use the develop tool. So let's go ahead and open the develop tool, and first we're gonna make certain parts a little bit brighter. Now to do that, we're gonna open the light section and increase the exposure just a little bit, somewhere around 0.2 or 0.3. After that, we can also adjust the shadow slider just a little bit, maybe just +5. Once we finish with that, we can then go into the masking and select the brush. With the brush, you wanna be on paint, softness on 100, and with the strength, let's go to somewhere around 40. Now we can adjust the size of our brush on the tool using the size slider, or you can use the bracket keys on your keyboard and adjust it from there. Now, when you're not sure about which parts should you make brighter, then follow the light. You can see on the image that, for example, this part was already getting some sun. So let's make one click. And when we do that, the brightness will disappear from everywhere, and now it will only appear on the areas where we're going to brush. So let's go ahead and brush over the little valley right here, and then also up here where you can see a little bit of the sun. After that, we can also zoom in a little bit closer using Command or Control plus. And then let's say that we also focus on our main subject and brush over that. So this rock right here, little bit here, and also maybe on this part here and on the little part down here at the base. Now keep moving around. If you want to see where your mask is, just use the backslash key on your keyboard and it will appear, and then the red overlay will indicate where you already brushed. Now let's have a look. We have one more rock right here. So let's adjust the size and just one quick brush over it, just to make sure that we highlight all of these parts. After that, let's zoom out, switch off our overlay, and let's have a look at what we've done so far. So that looks quite well. We can continue a little bit, maybe on this part here, also on the little hills here, on this little hill in the foreground, and maybe a little bit over the lakes at the base. Now, once we finish selecting the areas, you can always return into the adjustments and adjust it further. If you think that the areas you selected are a little bit too bright, you can always adjust the exposure slider and bring it down, or you can make it much brighter by increasing the exposure slider. But when it comes to dodge and burning, you really want to stay somewhere around 0.2 or 0.3. So that's it for the highlights. Now let's close the develop tool and open it again, and we're gonna do a little bit of burning to make the areas darker. So same thing, we're gonna take the exposure and bring it down again to minus 0.2 or 0.3. With the shadows, we can bring them down as well to minus 5, and then the same workflow into the masking, brush, stay on the paint, size we're gonna adjust as we go with the softness on 100 and strength on 40. After that, again, let's make the brush a little bit bigger and keep an eye on the image, see the areas that are already darker and just highlight them using your brush. So I'm thinking somewhere around here, maybe also a little bit on the background here over these little cliffs. And if we want, also at the background of the rock and on the mountain here. I think that's about it. Let's have a look, maybe a little bit more at the back here. And once we're done with that, let's again have a look at the before and after. And I think it looks quite well. Now again, just like before, you can always jump back into the adjustments and adjust it using the exposure and shadows sliders. Once we're done with this, let's close the develop tool and we are pretty much finished. But there is one more technique I want to show you, again built on the idea that we want to add attention towards a specific part of the image. It's kind of dodge and burn, but using radial gradient. So follow the idea that human eyes are naturally attracted to the brighter parts of your image. So what we can do, for example, on the top of the image on the sky, we can make the top a little bit darker, bring in more attention towards the center and towards our main subject. So how we gonna do this? We're gonna go back to the develop tool and we're gonna keep an eye on the sky. Let's bring down the exposure. We're gonna make it darker and we don't wanna go crazy, but I think somewhere around, let's have a look, maybe again, minus 0.3 looks good. After this, we're gonna go into the masking and this time we're gonna use the linear gradient. After that, what we need to do is to follow the instructions, click and drag to draw the gradient. So we're gonna follow the shape of the sky. Let's do something like this, make it nice and big because we want a big gradient, and then drag it on the top just to have a little bit of the sky darker. So I think somewhere around here looks good. Then you can rotate it if you want to, maybe bring it back up a little bit. And once you finish, just click on the little arrow before the linear gradient. Looking at it again, it is a little subtle, but when we look at the before and after, it's visible. Again, you can go back to the adjustments and make it a little bit more darker, but for me, I think somewhere around that minus 0.3 or 0.5 looks good. So that's it for this. We can close the develop tool and we are almost done. However, as I mentioned throughout the process, the last step we're gonna do is to add a little vignette. Vignette really helps to add more attention towards the center and to really guide the viewer through your image. So let's go ahead, open the vignette tool, and here we're gonna start by taking the amount slider and bring it down. One good technique is to bring it down a lot until you start to see it and then bring it back up. Another good technique when it comes to vignette is to step back from the screen for about half a meter or meter. As further you are from the screen, better you can see it. So for me, I think somewhere around -30 looks good. We can always double check the before and after. And again, just like everything, subtle is what you want to go for and build on that. Additionally, if you want, you can jump into the advanced settings and here use the inner light. That helps to add even more brightness into the center and again add the contrast between your edges and the center of the image. Again, as always, double check before and after, and I think it's really good. So now we can close the vignette and we are finished. So with that being done, it's time for step number 6, where we're gonna export the image. So let's go ahead, right click on the image and select export. First thing you need to do is to navigate towards the location where you want to export it, then adjust the name, so this is the Isle of Skye, and then we need to adjust the exporting options. Now this will very much depend on what you want to use your image for. However, as a standard, starting from the top, none on the sharpening, because we done the sharpening in the editing. Resize, we want to stay on original. And color space, stick to sRGB. After that, for the format, yes, we want to go for JPEG. Resolution 300 pixels on each will give you a great quality. And finally, with the quality, keep it on 100. When you finish with all of that, all there is left to do is to click on Save. Now the application will export your image and you can now start sharing it with the rest of the world. And that's it for today. If you have any questions about today's tutorial or Luminar NEO in overall, then make sure that you write them in the comment section under this video. If you did enjoy today's tutorial, then please go ahead and like and share it. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our future content. For today, thank you very much for watching and I already can't wait to see you in the next video.